Starts out with one of the first paragraphs in it saying that the goal of our work here, as far as man is concerned, can only be one thing, and that is in becoming the real self. And then the guide goes on to explain what the real self is, and explains that the real self is all that is good, all that is creation, all that is joy, all that is divine. And that the real self is creation itself and is nature. And I notice when I read the lectures that I hiccup on certain phrases, and those hiccups are useful because it tells you that you have a question or a glitch or there's an issue that you may have with the phrase or the idea underneath the phrase more accurately. And I had a glitch when I read this paragraph in the phrase, "For nature can be wholly trusted." And the reason I glitched is, first the guide says that my job is to access my real self, not the real self, but my real self. And that my real self is nature. And then the guide says that nature can be fully trusted. So if you take out the intermediate parts of the sentences, what the guide is saying is that I, or you, can be completely trusted. So just take that in for a moment as a possibility. That you in your true nature, in your innermost self, can be wholly and completely trusted. And that your task here on this planet is to find that place, to find that inner self. And then the guide moves on to talk about the function of the ego as a place that is supposed to bring us to the real self, the inner self. Now, I learned a little piece of reality one time that I am fascinated by, and I found it to be a good analogy for ego. And that is ego as bone. And the little piece of trivia that I uncovered one time was that there are only 2 land-based animals that have no bone, skeletal structure, external or internal, of any kind. One is a slug, and the other is a leech. That every other animal on the land, and by animal I even looked that up, at a multicellular organism, every other animal on the planet has some form of structure to support it. And the other piece of trivia that went with that was that without bone structure, an animal can only grow so large. So interestingly, slugs and leeches obviously are quite small. And that even worms, because I challenged that, and I said, well, what about worms? And apparently worms have a hydrostatic membrane that they puff up to act as support for them as they move around. And they're calling that an exoskeleton. So even worms have some kind of structure to support their body mass. Now, why am I boring you with this science fact? Because the ego, to some extent, is the bones, is the skeletal structure, or can be seen as that, of who we are. And what bones do is they may allow an organism to become large and to move and to run, to fly and to glide, but they also break, they're subject to joint damage, and they bring on all the other problems that bone and ligament structures do. So the ego being seen the same way, what the guide is saying is that you need the ego, even though it naturally over or underdevelops periodically. Okay? So a smoothly functioning ego is like a smoothly functioning skeletal structure. It supports you, it allows you to do what you need to do. At one point, the guide describes the ego as arms that reach out to receive or to give. And the trick with the ego is that once it has done that, it needs to let go. So a smoothly functioning ego, a healthy ego, will assist you in doing something. It will assist you in becoming or being or giving or doing, and then relax and basically wait for its next job, its next assignment, its next chore or task. So then again, the guide says that the only problems we have here on the earth have to do with an underdeveloped or overdeveloped ego. So if you can imagine, there's one cartoon that a certain teacher uses, and she uses a car, like a little Volkswagen. And for the underdeveloped ego, she shows this poor, sad thing with no tire pressure, and its fender falling off, and dents in its side, and it's just exhausted, one of those little cartoon exhausted cars with its tongue hanging out, as if a car had a tongue. And that is an underdeveloped ego, and it's not able to transport your real self to where you need to go. And in terms of an overdeveloped ego, that was represented by a car that's way too big for its wheels. So far too much body structure, far too much, carrying way more than it was designed to carry, puffed up and grandiose, so that it can barely move along and function. And that would represent an overdeveloped ego. So with either an underdeveloped or an overdeveloped ego, you're either going to not be able to do enough of your task, or you're going to wind up with the ego taking on more chores or getting in the way of what you need to do.